This is the Mercedes-AMG EQE 53, but really you only need 3 words to wrap your head around what this car is. Electric super sedan. I'm going to hit you with some of the headline numbers straight up because they are outrageous. If you spec this car correctly, you can have 505 kilowatts, 1,000 Newton meters, 2 electric motors, and a 0 to 100 time of 3.3 seconds. It's a rival for things like the Porsche Taycan and the Tesla Model S Plaid, and it's also the angriest car yet that we've seen from those mad hatters at AMG. So what does an outrageously powerful all-electric AMG feel like to drive? Well, we've come all the way to France where it's meant to be summer, but as you can see, it is absolutely soaking. But let's go and tackle the wet roads to find out. It's quite a sophisticated thing, the EQE 53. Peel back the skin and you'll find 2 electric motors, 1 for each axle. But the motor at the back features a 6-phase design rather than the usual 3, and that helps with power density and also repeatability. So unlike some other high-performance EVs, you should be able to do full-bore acceleration runs until you start to feel sick. Being electric, it also has torque vectoring, and that's not only fully variable between the 2 axles, but also side to side between individual wheels. Exactly how much power the EQE develops depends on your drive mode. In comfort, power is restricted to 80%, while sport mode bumps that up to 90%. But it's not until you engage Sport Plus that you have the full 500 kilowatts to deploy. Suspension comprises air springs and adaptive dampers, and the brakes are enormous. 415mm front discs. They can also help to recoup up to 260 kilowatts of energy, which can extend your range. Speaking of range, it's a respectable 526 kilometers on the WLTP cycle, and the 90.6 kilowatt hour battery can handle up to 170 kilowatt DC charging, providing you can find a charger powerful enough. Inside, you score some AMG specific seats and a multifunction steering wheel, plus Merc's enormous 1.4 meter hyperscreen, which stretches the full width of the dash, also features. Okay, couple of caveats right from the get-go. Weather isn't our friend today. It's absolutely chucking it down, torrential rain. Conditions aren't ideal to see what a super sedan from AMG can really do. Second, time also is not on our side. So we've only been experiencing the car for a few hours this morning. It's not ideal to make a definitive judgment on what this car is like, so it's kind of first impression stuff. But in terms of first impressions, I have to start with the cabin because this car is, wow, majors on showroom appeal and theatre. This car has the optional hyperscreen here in the cabin, and I kind of thought it might be a bit gimmicky and a bit over the top because basically the whole dashboard is a screen, but it's amazing how quickly you adjust to it, and really, it's absolutely fantastic. Right, how this car feels? It is seriously potent. There's just something ridiculously addictive about the power and the instantaneous response of an electric car, let alone one with 505 kilowatts and 1,000 Newton meters. When you get it lined up out of a corner and you flatten the throttle, it's an absolute ballistic missile. It also feels ridiculously complex. So 2 electric motors, one at the back is more powerful than the one at the front, but the way torque is shuffled around with this car is fully variable. So not only can it adjust front to rear, but also side to side. And in these conditions where it's quite wet, again, when you nail the throttle on the exit of a corner, you can kind of feel the car figuring out where it wants to send the power and torque to give you the best drive. Sometimes it can even feel a little bit oversteery on corner exit when you dial up Sport Plus mode, as we have just done on the little Manatino dial here on the steering wheel. It's properly exciting stuff. Mostly because you're traveling so quickly, but also because there's a part of your lizard brain all the way back there going, hang on, you've got a lot of grip to play with here, but there's no getting around the laws of physics because this car weighs 2.5 tons. It is a very, very heavy machine. Ride quality, we're on 21-inch wheels. They are massive, but ride quality is absolutely outstanding actually. We're on quite smooth French Alpine roads, so usual caveat applies. We'll see how it arrives in Australia later this year. But
big wheels, you don't really feel them crash or bang or thump. We've got air suspension with 3-stage adaptive dampers, so the ride quality, big tick so far. In terms of absolute grip and engagement, we're on Michelin tyres, big rubber, and while there is a lot of grip, the steering feels a little bit disconnected. It's kind of a guessing game as to how much grip you have at the front axle, particularly in these wet conditions. So that kind of makes it a bit of a guessing game when you barrel into corners, which robs a bit of confidence. On the way out, it's a barrel of laughs. Feels a little bit rear driven, like I've said before. Doesn't feel quite as engaging or as flat or as well sorted as something like a Porsche Taycan, but we'll have to get those two head to head in Australia to do a direct side-by-side comparison. Okay, let's talk about how this car sounds, because it's kind of a brave new frontier for a lot of manufacturers who are kind of figuring out on the fly how electric performance cars should sound. AMG's stab at it is interesting because when you are in comfort mode, there's no sound at all. It's very serene. Tyre noise is nicely suppressed as long as you're not on really coarse chip bitumen. It's a very comfortable, refined car to drive. But when you switch it around into Sport and Sport Plus, let me give it a bit of a... you get that sound. It sounds like a spaceship. I don't think it's going to be to everybody's taste, but good on AMG for having a red hot go to try and make this car sound engaging, because obviously a big thumping V8 soundtrack is so intrinsic to the AMG philosophy that they had to do something, and I think they've done a pretty good job. Final thing to talk about is the positioning of this car, because it's quite interesting. When it arrives in Australia later this year, AMG is talking about a price tag of around $200,000. Now, don't get me wrong, that is a bucket load of cash, but when you compare it with a existing E63, which is about $250,000, it's going to tempt a lot of people, I think, because of the sheer performance we have on tap. The car feels super techy in here, rides really nicely, probably more room in the cabin than an E-Class as well. So yeah, like I said, if it can arrive around $200,000, let's see if it does, it might be a pretty convincing thing. One thing I forgot to mention that helps with the sense of agility you have in this car is we have standard 4-wheel steering. You kind of tip the car in and it responds quite sharply, but then the laws of physics do kick in, particularly on, slippy surfaces like we are today. So the car initially feels quite agile, but you've kind of got to remember that you are hurling something that weighs 2.5 tons. So you can't rewrite the laws of physics, which again, this is something in the back of your mind which sort of holds back a little bit when you're really trying to drive this car to the limit. But now I'm driving at sort of 8-9 tenths. It's pretty convincing.